Okay, Mike Holman, answer me this question. David refuses to answer. If you divorce your cousin in Arkansas, are you allowed to still be on the clergy roster?
I have a couple of reactions to that. So first of all, um, I remember David at your church in Clear Lake. That was the first time I ever heard him preach. And I was there, and Jana was there, and he introduced me as his cousin-in-law, which I didn't know that that was a thing. I'm married to David, or David is married to my cousin. Um, and then another thought that comes to mind is, and this is Jessica's ancestor too. I think it's like our great grandparents or maybe great great grandparents. It was a quorum wedding. They were cousins, second cousins. So I think it was legal. But so that question hits me quite personally, and I would say absolutely.
I
Proof
just have
of
to say,
good
I found out.
proof of good background, you know. There's good genes there.
I have to say, I found out recently that the United States is one of the only countries that prohibits first cousin marriage. It's legal in most other places. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting? So
Huh.
there you go.
Okay, well, now I know that you love David Buchs, so that's a great introduction. What?
Hey,
Why don't you?
well, yeah.
Why
I
don't
mean,
you,
there's the cousins, and so his wife was a Huber, and like I loved the Huber cousins. They were my favorite cousins, and Angie. You know, like we got on thick as thieves back in the day.
So which cousins don't you like? And I want names.
All right,
Uh,
Josh.
do you have like a pay level or something after the show where you get to
We
I'll
should
tell you then.
we should.
Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna. Okay, so here's. Did you know that for a hot minute last week, the CloudCast was the most engaging Lutheran YouTube channel on the entire planet?
Tim Walls, he shouldn't, or not Tim Walls. Oh my goodness. Tim Wood.
That's
Did
called
you
a
hear that, Tim Wood? You're the governor of Minnesota. We're gonna start
He
calling
shouldn't
you
change his
Tampon
methodology on
Tim
us.
Wood.
Yeah.
it's called a big fish in a small pond.
There it is.
An exceedingly small pond.
Well. Welcome. Why don't you tell the listeners where you're serving?
I since December of last year, I serve at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Niles, Michigan, and St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Buchanan, Michigan, which is southwest Michigan, just north of the Indiana border. South Bend is about half an hour away, where Notre Dame is, which is awesome. And Lake Michigan is about 45 minutes away, which is also awesome. So we love being here. It's great.
Did
We
Pete
have a peach tree in our
Buttigieg?
backyard
Ooh,
and 4 apple trees. So
that's awesome. Did
yeah,
Pete Buttigieg move half an hour north to attend your church?
you know, who knows?
Mike, you are also, while serving as the pastor of that dual parish, you are also working on a doctorate in
Yeah,
coursework at present. Is that right?
yeah. At St. Louis. Yep, I'm in my first year, which I don't recommend. Starting a PhD program and getting a new parish. Um, I'm surviving, kind of.
You, this will be a great segue to the question of Paul Hensel and the Protestants. But you said to me last time I asked you something in history is what you want to write about. Have you narrowed that any further? Do you have a thesis that you'd like to aim towards?
I've got a sticky note.
Oh, you do.
So I'm learning about one of my classes this semester is narrative preaching, which has made me think about stories and how important stories are. Um, so I was thinking about the story, so to speak, of the Wisconsin Synod and how the Protestants kind of didn't didn't play along with that story And, we all kind of have a shared story of synodical conference Lutheranism, so to speak. And, the Protestants and the Wauwatosan's before them, they were critical. They were loyal. They didn't hate their background, but they were critical. And, what happens when you have a story that gets contradicted, criticized? They might just kick you out.
I have often thought about how on a more personal, individual level, repentance, one way to describe repentance is acknowledging that the story is different than what you've been telling yourself. And that's catastrophic for a person.
Change your mind. Change your mind. I mean, that's the root of it, right? Metanoia. And changing your mind is definitely involved in the story of my life is not the way it should be.
So with that thesis, are you going to write about the Wisconsin Synod, or are you going to change gears and write about our perceived Missouri story?
Yeah, I mean, it's only a sticky note right now. But so one of the things that I don't really know, to be honest. So I have in my mind, I don't have to write a thesis until, a few years out. The thing is that I spent, just years reading Faith Life, which is the Protestant journal. And so it might be nice to leverage that background, for whatever it is that I'm going to do. And so I don't really know.
So thinking about Faith Life, this book here, The Hardening of Israel's Heart and the Hardening of Heart in the Church, flows out of your reading of Faith Life and this fellow Floyd Brand, who is a member of the Protestant Conference, translated this work by Paul Hensel.
He has gone to heaven, but
he's gone to heaven. That's right.
Okay. Hey, David, will you show the binding of the book real quick?
No, we don't need to do that.
no, this is like this. So yeah, so this is my main criticism. It's backwards. It's like it's sitting on my bookshelf.
You can blame. Let's see. Why isn't you can blame Ed Riojas for that? I paid him good money, and then he put the binding upside down.
It's certainly unique. Oh, so I got to tell you this. So speaking of Lutheran history, I ordered this book on the history of the English district of the Missouri Synod. The one, it was written by a former district president, or what do they call them, bishops? I don't know. And so I ordered it, and it was print on demand, and I'm not kidding. The cover was a niche history of the English district, but the contents of the book was the Boy Scouts manual from 1912.
It's probably correct.
Well, I mean, so speaking of the Wisconsin Synod, we got Boy Scouts.
I mean, it's a confluence of a lot of things.
It was perfect. It was $40. I sent it back. I should have kept it it would have been a collector's item. So
Mike, you wrote the historical introduction to this book by Paul Hensel, or this collection of essays written by Paul Hensel. Would you mind describing just the general overview of the history? I mean, there's a lot of detail, and you write it out really nicely in the historical introduction. So I commend the book to anybody, but can you give us the layout of the story that leads to these essays? But then I'm also want to ask you, as you've reflected on it, what are the takeaways for us at present? What do we need to hold in mind, remember, and apply as ministers at today?
So, the history there is, it's probably helpful to start with the professors at the seminary in the Wisconsin Synod. And it was, Wisconsin and Missouri joined together in the Synodical Conference in the, 1870s, I think it was. And the next generation, so right about the turn of the century, 1904, there were some new professors there, John Philip Kaler and August Pieper, who is Francis Pieper's younger brother, and eventually a guy named John Schaller. He doesn't come until 1908. But those three, Schaller, Pieper, and Kaler, are sometimes called the Wauwatosa theologians, and they are, I think, they're interesting on a number of levels. They are all about the same age. They all went to St. Louis for seminary at about the same time. They all seem to be very interested in Steckart as a teacher who came from Germany and maybe kind of breathed a little bit of a new breath of air, so to speak, in how things had been going on at St. Louis. I think August Pieper is even his brother-in-law, or there's a relation there, I know, with August Pieper and his wife. So I don't know if they necessarily set out to do this, but the Wisconsin seminary and their journal, Theologische Quartalschrift, they wanted to emphasize history and exegetical theology as opposed to systematic theology and practical theology. And if you think about how St. Louis, the emphasis in St. Louis was really on systematic, or even in the Missouri Synod, on systematic and practical theology. And so these Wisconsin professors were interested in history and exegetical theology. J.P. Kaler in particular was, interested in what history has to offer. And that was kind of a new discipline. History didn't really come into its own until the 1800s. And so he's bringing to bear kind of a newer method and looking at what that has to offer for theology. Another thing I would say about the Wauwatosa theologians is that they were bold and weren't afraid to kind of sticking their necks out, and they didn't really they didn't shy away necessarily from controversial topics, although they might look at them differently and so on. So from 1904 until 1924, which is where we'll talk about the Protestants and the hardening of heart, we had these professors who were kind of doing some new stuff. And then in 1924, there was a controversy that came up at their college in Watertown, Northwestern. There was a thievery ring that there were some boys who were stealing from businesses in town, and they were stealing quite a bit, like cameras and or just like gum and candy and stuff like that, but several $100s worth, which in today's money is thousands of dollars. And this was discovered, and the faculty dealt with the faculty dealt with the discipline, which was normal, and they had different punishments. Some they expelled, some they suspended, and some they put on campus arrest, so you couldn't leave campus, as different forms of punishment depending on how severely implicated they were. But I think it was a group of 21 boys or men that were disciplined, and it was about a third each with those different punishments. Unfortunately, there was, I believe, an ice storm that knocked out the telephone lines at that time, and so some of these boys just showed up at home, and their parents were like, "Why are you here?" and and you're suspended. And I'm not sure about this, but I think maybe some of them came from more prominent families in the synod. So uh, there was then a movement that basically said, "Oh, the punishment doesn't fit the crime," and they worked with the administration in the school, and so the board that governed the school overrode the faculty. Two of the faculty members resigned in protest. One of them is J.P. Kaler's son, Carl, and a professor at the seminary. And that kind of started the problem. And um, the problem, so that there were meetings and there was a deposition, and one of the professors, one of the newer professors, Reber, at the seminary, hired a stenographer to take notes, to get like the story, and then that got him in trouble with the seminary. And there was a rivalry between J.P. Kaler and August Pieper. J.P. Kaler became the president of the seminary after John Schaller died in the influenza epidemic. And that, didn't August Pieper didn't like that. And so there's all these personal dynamics as well that are involved. In the fall of that year, so that in 1924, the thievery was taking place during Lent. Actually, they were going. I think the when they got caught was actually on a Wednesday of Lent. Uh, uh, but in the fall of that year, there was a meeting to try to settle things, and Carl Kaler, J.P. Kaler's son, said, and August Pieper was there, and Carl Kaler said that the Wisconsin Synod is under the judgment of is under judgment, and for him, judgment is always tied up with hardening, with God's hardening of heart. And talking about story is interesting here, because the Protestants, um, they report that August Pieper took a hold of his head and was like, oh, and there's kind of a love-hate relationship with the Protestants and August Pieper. Like, they liked him as a professor, but they felt so betrayed by what he did. And so they interpreted this as he's being torn apart inside spiritually. I just when I was visiting my in-laws, I spent some time at the archives. They live near Waukesha, Wisconsin, where the archives are kept for the Wisconsin Synod. So I did some research there when I was visiting last year, and I found from August Pieper himself that is not what was going on in his head. What was going on in his head was, this cannot stand, and Carl is going to be removed, and he's going to see to it. So, we just can't have that. We can't have people say that the synod is under the judgment of God's hardening of heart. So that touches off this topic of hardening of heart, and with this book, Paul Hensel, one of the circuits, well, they might call it differently. I think they call them our circuits. I think they call conferences. One of their circuits took up the topic of hardening of heart, and one guy started, and he was like, I'm not going to do this. This is too hot," because there were all kinds of divisions that were taking place afterwards. And so then Paul Hensel took up the task of, what is the hardening of heart in the scriptures? And he wrote, I think, 50 different articles, basically going through the whole Bible and tracing the story of the hardening of heart in both the Old Testament and in the New Testament. He started in about 1924, and he ended, well, no, excuse me. Uh, he started about, I think, 1927. I think he ended about 1935. In the midst of that, towards the end, when he was writing these articles, he himself lost one of his congregations of his dual parish. He had served a dual parish for like 20 years. One of his congregations said, "We're going to stick with the Wisconsin Synod," and because he got kicked out of the Wisconsin Synod, and so yeah, intense spiritual uh intense spiritual work, you might say, of taking things very seriously. Um, a lot of people think it's, a tempest in a teapot and just, everybody should have just calmed down and then, but I don't know. I think that's maybe it would have worked, but I think they discover some stuff that's worthwhile.
So that, I mean, that notion, that assessment of this kind of conflict, or that assessment of, how do you understand? I mean, like, of behavior, there's always this attempt to say it's really not as bad as it seems. Like, that's such a pernicious word from the devil. Can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like Carl Kahler and the objection to the overriding by the administration, it would primarily be an objection about partiality, right? So this is not sound for us to to show partiality. And if you are a Christian and in the business of showing partiality, something has gone haywire, and it's not trivial, right?
Yeah. Well, it it would be nice if everything were just like it's kind of messy. It's
Yeah.
just messy. So, you know, even right there with Carl Kahler, uh, the argument was, hey, the documents say that the board has the final say on discipline. And so the board did what it did. Now, the board had never been involved before. And Carl Kahler and this other guy named, I think, was Parisius, they were concerned about what this would do to these students' souls, so to speak. Like that sounds like that was quite the ordeal too, of bringing discipline on 20 some guys, and I mean, that's no small thing. And some of them were, um, brought to repentance and tears, and and then just to reverse it all. So, according to the strict letter of the law, so to speak, the board was in the right. They had that ability to change the decisions that the faculty made unanimously, by the way. There might have been one abstention, but like the faculty was united. Um, and then later on too, this is quite a saga. J.P. Kahler, by the way, is kicked out of the Wisconsin Synod too, and of his professorship. But there too, like he made some just, oh man, why did you do that, J.P. Kahler? Because he signed. So there's a- another part of the final kind of part of the story. It's called the Bites paper, um, where the just shall live by faith, and it's just this kind of Jeremiad of what is wrong with our synod, and he lays it out there, and it's a little it it's heartfelt. There's no question about that. And in fact, he kind of copies a ton of stuff that August Pieper. Yeah, I mean it's almost plagiarism of August Pieper. But he's not August Pieper, and he doesn't have the position. So uh, J.P. Kahler signs on to it's called Gutachten, uh, basically condemning the paper, and then he changes his mind, and it just creates havoc. I mean, it's just I can, you know, it's a sad story. I wish that if only it could have been done differently, but it's like so human and so messy. Personally, one of the reasons why I'm so interested in it is I think that these guys, the Wauwatosans, and then also the Protestants after them, have their finger on several issues in 20th century Lutheranism that they're working on it, and elsewhere in the Synodical Conference, people aren't really working on it. Like history, what do we do with history? History relativizes and so on, or there's the beginning of church growthism kind of in the 1910s, 1920s. They're commenting and working on that sort of stuff, um, so I don't know. I don't know if it was if the freedom of the situation allowed them to negotiate that stuff, and then the controversy kind of shut it all down. I don't know.
Have you traced at all where any of the boys ended up? Did any of them become prominent Wells theologians? Do you know?
So no, I haven't. In fact, I had never known who they are in all of the literature. Um, in all of the literature, they don't say who it is. And like even for the recordings and stuff, they use numbers. But again, the Wells Archive has a list. They say who is who. Um, and so I think I took a photo of it, but I haven't traced it down of who those people were and what happened with them.
Did you like exclaim out loud when you found that list in the archives? That's
It
a great
was
discovery.
interesting. Yeah. Well, again, it's like you see it from a different side of the story, and but yeah, uh, I think that I think it's the official documents, even from Northwestern, that are in the archive. That I think that's where I found that was they're the literal faculty notes from that controversy.
Hmm. So even if we don't know who the boys were, and I'm sure there's got to be a descendant of some, like he became a pastor and then there's still some living pastors today. That'd be fascinating. I would love to talk.
Circle where cousins marry cousins and all that, without doubt.
Yeah, that's the Holmen Buchs story all over again. But just tracing the thought, how has this infiltrated us? Like, do you see these kind of divisions? Like, my question is, like, how does it play out in Missouri? Because like we seem to be able to talk about things, and like I can critique the Missouri Synod, and I'm not going to get kicked out. I think for the most part.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the Protestants are, well, they become their own breed of people, and but they characterize Missouri as just kind of stuck up, and they think that they have everything figured out, and it's just a matter of marshaling the troops and let's go on to victory. And so are uh, they are frustrated in times past, earlier in the 20th century. They're frustrated with Missouri, that it's all just kind of grow, 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 so long as we're growing. And let's not bog ourselves down with any kind of petty disagreements, and because that'll hurt growth. Interestingly, I got to know the Protestants a bit. We went to a few of their conferences and stuff. I would say they're not. I don't think, as far as I know, I don't think they're meeting formally anymore. But of those who attended, I would say probably the majority of them now attend Missouri Synod churches. Um, Floyd Brand, who translated the book, uh, he was attending a Missouri Synod church when he died. So yeah, time changes things, and modern Missouri, yeah, maybe we can talk more openly than possibly in the past. But like if you read like David Scare's memoirs of how things were at St. Louis Seminary in the 50s, You're not gonna. There's not going to be a lot of debate and discussion.
That's a fun read. If anybody's looking for something to read,
Yes.
it's not your typical history. Have you read J.T. Robinson's thesis? It's called "The Spirit of Triumphalism in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod," and it's examining a statement of 1945.
No, but that totally rings a bell of J.P. Kaler, and this would be 18 or 1910s, 19 maybe early 1920s. He says he has that same thesis. He says that the title of his article is "Sanctification is not Hurrah," and it was written in the wake of World War One, where that kind of martial, all we have to do is gin up the troops and let's go, and he says that's not sanctification. So he is sensitive, and then I would also say the other Wauwatosa theologians too, they're sensitive to triumphalism, particularly Missouri Synod triumphalism. They're like loyal critics, and they annoyed the Missourians. Like there was quite a bit of back and forth, where St. Louis was annoyed by articles that would appear in the Wisconsin Journal.
David, that's what I'm trying to do with our circuit newsletter. I'm just trying to annoy everybody.
I think the general consensus is that you succeed. That's my my estimation.
Mike, go subscribe, lcmscloud.org. Thanks.
It might be the only circuit newsletter in the entire Missouri Synod. So it wins all of in every category for that reason.
We are the most engaging circuit newsletter in the entire world, and I don't need Tim Wood's approval, or Tim Waltz's.
Or Tim Waltz. So let's shift gears here, Mike. I really appreciate all of that, but we also wanted you to talk about Matthew 6 with us. In fact, when I asked you about coming on the CloudCast, you said, "I like the Sermon on the Mount." And so maybe you could I'm really curious if you could just say, why do you like the Sermon on the Mount so much?
Before you answer that question, is Jesus being triumphant in the Sermon on the Mount?
Oh, he's humbling people.
Oh, good. Okay.
The opposite of triumphalism. I would say it's so the Sermon on the Mount is related to the Sermon on the Plain in Luke. And I had this experience when I used to meet with a few guys in Iowa for a weekly study. And I switched from the 1 year to the 3 year because that's what they were doing. And so Luke 6 came up, and I'm sure I'd read it before, but for the stars aligned or something, and I was like, wow, he says like 3 times in Luke chapter 6, if you're my disciple, you're going to do these things. Like, that's how it is. If you're my disciple, you're going to do these things. And it like changed the way I thought about Jesus's teachings. Like, and it's in the Sermon on the Mount too. Like at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, the one who does these things is like a man who builds on the rock. So if you aren't doing these things, I guess you can call yourself a Christian, but you're your own very special kind, where you're the teacher really, who is the one that needs to be listened to, not Jesus.
So these things in Matthew 6 seem to be 3 things, right? So verse 2, verse 5, and then verse 16, Jesus says, when you, and then you have give to the needy in verse 2, so that's alms, and then prayer in verse 5, and then fasting in verse 16. And he just assumes that you're going to do it. And he's taking what the Pharisees are doing, and he's teaching us an even better way to do it.
Right. So, yeah, and I can relate I don't know if you want me to keep doing this, but the
Everything
the
is fair game,
Wisconsin
Mike.
Synod is all the Wauwatosa theologians are all about how God's kingdom is internal, not external, and Kaler investigated this in at the 400th anniversary of 1517, and that was one of the characteristics he pointed out about Rome, was that it was external, and and I don't know if it's been a while, so don't quote me on this necessarily, but I think he kind of relates that even to that Missourians tend to be external, like pomp and circumstance, and the more Protestant Wisconsin Synod cares about what's going on in your heart.
It's got to be both and, right? Because so verse 1 here, he says, don't do these things in order to be seen by them. But in Matthew 5, he did say, let your light shine before others so that they may give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So like that's the purpose of it. So there's an external thing, but clearly the internal is more important.
Yeah.
I mean, is
I
it as
agree.
simple as your motive, right? So when you are motivated as a disciple of Christ to give alms, to pray, and to fast, you don't have to like hide those things in order lest you be seen by other men, right? But if you do them in order to receive the reward of being seen by other men, then they become a stench, right?
Or are you so in love with God and his righteousness that you'll throw away your ecclesiastical career to do what's right?
It's good. It's a good question. do,
Yeah.
do you notice how often the word father appears in this chapter? It's 12 times. So it's all over the place. And I did a quick concordance search. So Matthew, and this could include headers because Bible Gateway's concordance isn't always the best, but 72 times the word Father is mentioned, and that's second only to John, which is well over 100, which makes sense because Jesus is always talking about his relationship there. And it obviously begins, the Lord's Prayer begins with Our Father, but talking about like who is our audience? Who are we concerned about pleasing? And it's got to be God as our Father.
Definitely. I mean, I think that's that might be the overall theme, that Jesus cares about the Father and not any other gods, whether those be in the form of authorities or power, or like he'll trust God. And the people at the cross said, they quoted, I think it's Psalm 22. He trusted in God. Let God deliver him if he wants him.
It's interesting because at the same time that all of these um, all of these things are humbling, right? So like you said, when he says this is what my disciples do, it serves the effect of humbling. At the same time, the kind of obviousness of these things busts through in what Jesus says. So you get to the end of chapter 6 and he's kind of like, quit being ridiculous. The Father takes care of the sparrows, takes care of the lilies, and you think that you, for one thing, are not under his care, or that you can care for yourself better than he does. It's not. I mean, it almost comes to the point of being like, this isn't really a matter of faith. This is just obvious, and look at how corrupt your heart is that even the obvious thing you can't believe.
Even though it's obvious, it's like we're strangely forgetful, like.
Yeah.
And well, our mind gets into other frames of mind, and like it reminds me of Luther, that he said that faith is this incredibly powerful thing. It can move mountains. With faith we can dance through life and be, nothing can possibly get us down. We will triumph. And yet it's easily damaged and lost. Like we're easily our mind goes elsewhere. And so like that portion of Matthew 6, I really like it, and have used it for funerals a couple times and really enjoyed using it.
Back on that, the wisdom part, it seems like there's two sections here. If you want to do some typology, that Jesus is being a new Moses in the first 18 verses or so, and then it seems to shift to being a new Solomon in verse 19. Because a lot of this language, this wisdom he's given us, it sounds an awful lot like Solomon in Proverbs and then Ecclesiastes. So like verse 26, look at the birds of the air. Well, Solomon tells us to look at the ants. Right, so like consider the animals, and what kind of knowledge can we get from that? Well, quite a bit actually, but apart from your father, it doesn't come full circle.
Well, and then connected as well is the the indictment of the human heart, in that Solomon spends so much time saying things that are really not that complicated, and that's kind of like the potency of a proverb, right? Is that it's simple and yet extraordinarily difficult for us. So I think one of my favorite proverbs that comes to mind all the time is, "The vexation of a fool is known at once." And when you contemplate that, that if you are reactive in your folly and you open your mouth, now everybody knows you're a fool. Like this is very simple. It's a simple fact of of the way the world works and the way humanity works, and yet, who can tame their tongue, right? James hits the ball out of the park. It's like, if you can manage to do that, then you're the most powerful person in the world, right?
Ooh, I'm glad you brought up James, because it seems to be, and this is an exclusive, but the tongue in James seems to be for the clergy, right? The preachers. So the tongue obviously controls the body. So if your clergy are sick because we're the preachers, well then like the entire church is going to suffer. And Jesus brings up the same thing here in verse 22, but it's a different part of the body. It's the eye. And I'm thinking of the episkopos, right? The overseer. Like we're meant to be the watchers out in the world and see what's going on, and then also as the tongues. So this isn't exclusively about clergy, but if we don't take some clerical wisdom from this, I think we're missing it too. Because Paul obviously talks about the body being the church, and then have you ever considered what part of the body you are, Mike? I think you'd probably be the spleen. Like, I like you. I'm not sure if you're necessary.
I'll take it. Give me another.
Well, I'm full of them.
So I'm not sure if I share your love of episcopal governance in the church, but
I
it
didn't
does
say
remind
that.
me. It does remind me of something Paul Hensel said that I think is kind of haunting, especially for pastors. I think it's in the hardening of Israel's heart. He talks about how pastors' kids will.
I've underlined that and circled that through and through. Yeah.
Well, pastors' kids will become unbelievers, and he says something like, I mean, it's not just this, but he actually points to wives of pastors that they will they'll throttle the faith because they're afraid of the pain that can come to the home when a pastor does what's right. And wow, like, I mean, and he says it a lot better than I do. I mean, he's quite. I think Paul Hensel is just a wonderful writer. And I think he talks about smothering the baby. The baby's smothered in the cradle, out of fear.
Yeah. Yeah. It's brutal. And I mean, and that's so. I want to think for just a second about the thesis that all of God's judgment has something to do with hardening. Is it true? Is that a true thesis?
Would be a whole nother topic. So that's a Wauwatosa original. The Wauwatosans were, they were, even though they were critical, they were the biggest fanboys ever of Synodical Conference Lutheranism. They loved the Synodical Conference's innovations, so to speak, both with church and ministry. That Missouri followed the lead of Luther, instead of the 17th century dogmaticians, and also on predestination, that they followed Luther instead of the more staid conservative Lutheranism of later Lutheranism. So they loved the Luther, and um, uh, so they see what happened in the synodical conference, with the synodical conference's work on election. They see this as a real theological advance, like a contribution to the world for theology. And they do similar, at least J.P. Kaler has an article on hardening, and he sees hardening along the same lines, that just as the doctrine of election is the quintessence of the gospel, hardening is the quintessence of God's law of judgment.
Yeah.
And so with election, it's all about God choosing, God acting. And then also with hardening, it's God who's doing it. And, hardening involves human beings because they harden themselves, but eventually God hardens. And then it, then you're done. Even if you want to repent, you won't be able to. And it's a mystery, to be sure, but so is election.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't have one mystery without the other. You have to have them both.
Going with that, David, I don't know if I've said this on the show before, but Origen gives some really good insight into hardening when he's talking about Pharaoh, and he compares human beings to clay and then wax, and the same sun hits both, but clay and wax react far differently to the heat. And I thought that was pretty insightful. So if you're wax,
I mean, it's
like
the parable
if you're
of the sower, right?
right, yeah. If you're a believer, it's gonna change you. But if you're clay, you're gonna become hardened.
Yeah, and that, I mean, so one very practical challenge that I perceive, I'd love to hear you guys talk about this, but we are keenly aware of that fact, that God's word produces one or the other of these extreme effects, that it seldom does anything in the middle, and that what we take to be a neutral response is judgment, right? There is no neutral response. So it's either salvation or damnation, and the notion that is what happens when you open your mouth and proclaim God's word makes us apprehensive about doing it. And so we'd much rather hold off on that crisis. We'd rather delay that crisis and not find out how somebody's going to react. And of course, in therein is just extraordinary vanity, right? Because God is the one who decides. He's the one who renders the judgment. But it's mortifying, right? It's mortifying to know that when you utter this word, what God might do with it, right?
And it makes me think of Paul in 2 Corinthians, that we are the odor of Christ, and the smell of salvation to those who are being saved, and the smell of condemnation to those who are being damned. And then he says, who is sufficient for these things? Like the ministry that Paul is defending with the Corinthians is it's the most important thing on earth. Who is sufficient for these things? And you know well, just to relate that to stuff we've been talking about, there does tend to be this desire to domesticate, and the Protestants did not suffer from that affliction. So that's I think one of the reasons why they're interesting. I mean, they were probably hard to deal with, but boy, you didn't have to wonder what they thought.
This is exactly how Paul talks in 2 Corinthians, right? He's like, he kind of has, I feel him, maybe I'm projecting, but he's wrestling with the same propensities, right? So he's like, this is our resolution. We have resolved not to use disgraceful and underhanded ways or to tamper with the word of God, which he wouldn't have to say out loud unless that were a temptation, right? we from now on we regard no one according to the flesh, because that is a temptation to regard people according to the flesh, right? It's an ongoing and perennial struggle, right?
And the unusual things that Jesus is teaching in the Sermon on the Mount too is applicable along those lines. Like people didn't and people don't give like Jesus says we're supposed to, or pray the way that Jesus says that we're supposed to. I mean, he is teaching us very. I mean, he would have us repent, reorient our lives, to think differently about how we do all kinds of things. Don't lay up for yourself treasures on earth, but treasures in heaven, which nobody else is going to see. The kindnesses, the forgiveness that you give, like that doesn't necessarily that I doesn't necessarily make you richer. In fact, it probably makes you poorer. Because forgiveness, it's always costly. If it's at all serious, you have to give up on your claims for justice, in order to forgive, and that's hard.
You want to talk about anxiety?
Okay.
That makes me anxious.
Well, Jesus says, don't be anxious.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Problem solved.
Well, so
I
David,
mean,
you
Go
said
ahead.
like the thing with a proverb is it's pithy, it's short, it makes you think. You can't and this seems to be the ultimate proverb at the end. Like, therefore, do not be anxious, for tomorrow be anxious for itself. And you know that deep down. But if I tell you, don't be anxious because being anxious is a sin, well, then you're more anxious because you're worried that you're sinning.
But it's important to say that because, of course, prior to that moment, you thought that anxiety was some sort of a badge of distinction, right? Look at me and my anxiety, as if you should wear it proudly.
That's right.
Do you think that most of your pastoral care is dealing with anxiety? I like overwhelmingly, that's the number one thing I probably see that I'm dealing with.
It does feel like you could characterize a lot of trouble, a lot of needed counsel as having an element of, right, anxious about things that need to be sorted out, worry, concern, and part of it, maybe you could describe it this way: um, uh, anxiety not only is betrays a lack of trust in God, but it also debilitates you, like keeps you from doing the things you should be doing, right? And so that's often how it manifests, I think.
Worldly grief works death.
Yeah.
Grief from God works repentance and life.
Man, I really like 2 Corinthians.
I love it. I'm teaching it, so it's on my mind. And by the way, I generally hate, well, hate's maybe a little strong, but I don't enjoy commentaries. I think so much of them are just a waste of time. Like, I don't care about a lot of stuff, but there's one commentary I absolutely love, and it's Mark Seifrid's 2 Corinthians commentary. Best commentary ever written.
Whoa,
There it is.
that's
I
a
have it on your
strong endorsement.
recommendation. There it is, right there.
Right there.
The
Yeah. It's good.
PNTC. What's the PNTC? What series is that?
Pillar New Testament commentary.
Okay, Seifried 2 Corinthians.
Erdman's. Yeah.
Wow.
And I'll put
Have
a plug in, like for I would say, and this isn't about the commentary, but first and if Romans and Galatians were especially applicable during the time of the Reformation, I think First and Second Corinthians are especially applicable to today. You've got a rich congregation who's chasing glory, essentially, and this is Paul's response. I mean, that is the modern world. Rich people chasing glory.
That sounds applicable. We have to go back to the Old Testament after this, but maybe the Corinthians will be the first Pauline epistle we tackle.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Now, I was just emailing with a fella about James Jordan Judge's commentary. That's pretty dang good. I thoroughly enjoyed that, but we could debate the greatest commentary of all time. You probably have to
I
say
didn't
something about
catch you
Augustine.
said a commentary on what?
Judges by
Oh, okay.
James Jordan. I
It's
have
got
to.
some esoteric name. What's it called, Josh? Remember?
Let me look. It's on my shelf here. Here's the esoteric name: Judges,
Oh,
a
never
practical
mind.
and theological commentary.
Okay. I thought there was something like God's War Against Humanism or something like that. Maybe that's a
Oh,
different work by
well,
James
that's going to
Jordan.
get you going, and then you can start talking about Erasmus, and then here we are.
That's right. I do love talking about Erasmus. Yeah.
Mike, any closing thoughts on Matthew 6? Give me some wisdom.
Well, I don't know. Sorry.
If you were going to preach,
Matthew chapter 6.
if you were going to preach on any portion of it, which pericope would you pull out and why?
Therefore, do not be anxious about your life and so on. I mean, I just that the thought that God is all powerful and that He likes you, and you put those two things in combination, things have to go well for you. Even if you go through an awful lot, things have to go well for you when you have those two things in combination.
It's making me think of the Augustine quote, our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they find their rest in you. It's like our anxiety comes from this fact that we know we're limited and we think we live in a limited world and we're just trying to grasp everything we can and we realize we can't, but we are created for the infinite God. And so we can't find rest until we've got Christ who gives that to us.
That's where the stories, the narratives of abundance are so valuable. I mean, I love the widow's oil and flour in a lot with Elijah. And I love that kind of like the instantiation of her faith is that she pours it out, and when she pours it out, she discovers that there's no such thing as scarcity when God's word is employed.
That's a great point. Our whole economic system is based on this fact of scarcity, but is it a lie?
There's I don't know I listen to Psalms in my car, and it's the Church of England has it's the Psalter, so it's Coverdale, and I don't know which psalm it is, but one of them says, talking about the wicked, that you make a mock of the counsel of the poor because he puts his trust in God. Like you mock the poor man who trusts in God, and that's what makes you wicked.
It's great. Hey, one closing question. It's Mike, what's grinding your gears? And this could be anything. You could tell me what you're annoyed with, or what you're reading, or anything else you're listening to in the car, or if you have any cousins problems that you really need to discuss. Get it off your chest, buddy.
I do have a cousin's problem. I haven't seen them recently, and need to see them again. It's been a long time. Boy, I don't know. I'm looking forward to summer, where I feel like I'm burning the candle at both ends, and I'm looking forward to not having PhD classwork to do on my day off. Like I want a real day off.
That sounds really nice. David, anything grinding your gears?
Well, so everything that Mike said about chasing glory notwithstanding, I want to say that Jessica, my wife, has agreed that she will finally listen to an episode of this podcast if we get 500 YouTube subscribers. So, I mean, that's the glory I'm after, and I'm not ashamed to say it.
She would listen to this podcast when her beloved cousin was the guest.
Well, I mean, I wasn't going to say this out loud, but she did say, "Oh, Mike's going to be on. I'll listen to that."
That's good.
Yeah,
so
like,
there you go,
share,
Josh.
subscribe.
Right.
Here's what's grinding my gears. I happened to look at the box for the communion wafers yesterday as I was preparing the patent. And you guys want to guess how many calories a communion host is?
3.
No, according to the box, it's 0. So
Oh,
the
okay.
nutritional facts: 0 calories, 0 fat, 0 carbs, 0 protein, and it's like serving size 1. So I was like, so you're telling me if I eat all thousands of these, it's going to be 0 calories. So there's your.
That sounds like a new diet plan.
That's what I'm
right.
saying. Only the Lord's
Yeah.
Supper, and we're good to go, baby.
Hey, thanks for joining us, Mike. We really enjoy all of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate it. We'll have to have you on again for our 500th subscriber party so that Jessica will really listen then.
There you go.
Great. Excellent.
All right, I'm
Sounds
going to hit
good.
stop.